This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
This podcast is sponsored by The Forward. Stay up to date with unlimited access to news, culture, and opinion all through a Jewish lens. And for our listeners, for 2NJB listeners, get 6 months of The Forward for $15. Visit forward.com/partner offer and enter promo code 2NJB to get an exclusive offer for podcast listeners. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, IsraelNationalNews.com. And last but not least, in collaboration with Australian Jewish News, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com. Our guest today is a great friend of the podcast. We've had the honor of hosting him quite a few times, but always in a very different capacity than today. In the past, we've introduced Dr. Michael Oren as someone who served as the deputy minister in the prime minister's office, as member of Knesset in the Kulanu Party, and of course as the Israeli ambassador to the United States in the years 2009 to 2013. But today, we're introducing Dr. Michael Oren as a novelist. Not many people know this. Dr. Oren has released several nonfiction books in the past, including Sand Devil, Reunion, and a collection of short stories titled The Night Archer and Other Stories. As you can see here, if you're watching our video.
It's not nonfiction, it's
fiction.
It's fiction.
Sorry, fiction.
Nonfiction was the history book.
It's a non-nonfiction.
Yeah, not nonfiction.
Yeah.
Nonfiction. Yeah.
But in just about a week, you're about to, your latest novel is going to hit the bookshelves. To All Who Call in Truth tells the story of Sandy Cooper, a guidance counselor and a coach in a suburban junior high school, whose otherwise uneventful life turns upside down after he gives a word of advice to a troubled student, which embroils him in a forbidden relationship and the exposure of a twisted murder.
Ooh.
Juicy.
Ooh.
Aside from his extensive service to the country, Dr. Michael Oren also taught history at the Ben-Gurion University. He was a visiting professor at Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown. We are thrilled to be joined by Dr. Oren on the podcast today to talk about his new novel and, of course, a bit of politics.
A little bit. I know.
How could we not?
Eitan, always good to be back here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank
you so much. And for your nonfiction books as well.
Okay, guys, before we start, we have sponsors in plural.
Yes, our sponsors. So first of all, if you're listening to this podcast, you have some interest in Israel, for sure. And you're probably dying to come here, okay? You're just looking for the opportunity.
The most vaccinated country in the world.
Exactly. And if you're looking for that opportunity, Masa Israel Journey is the answer. Okay, so check out Masa Israel Journey. You can find them at masaisrael.org/2nicejewishboys, masaisrael.org/TWO Nice Jewish Boys. Masa Israel Journey, they are the marketplace for long-term opportunities here in Israel. You can explore your career path. You can live out your passions. You can make a positive impact on the world.
You were on Masa.
I was on Masa. I was. And look where I am now. No, really, guys, it changes your life, these programs. It's a really amazing opportunity to experience Israel and to also grow in your career. Masa Israel Journey allows you to work and study remotely from Israel. So you come here and you can work and study remotely. That's since the pandemic. But there's no need for that anymore because Israel is fully vaccinated.
Yep.
You don't need to apply. You don't need to pause your life. Okay, you don't need to know Hebrew, but you do get funding. So go to masaisrael.org/2nicejewishboys and check them out.
Also,
yes,
very exciting new sponsor.
This episode is sponsored by the Susie and Kevin Davis Foundation, which supports New York City's underserved community through its nonprofit First Workings. Guys, Kevin Davis and Susie Davis are amazing, and their foundation is even more amazing. Check them out. First Workings. You can find more information about them at firstworkings.org. Basically, First Workings arranges paid internships, mentorships, and extensive workplace readiness training for very bright students from New York's public schools. Check them out, firstworkings.org,
Highly recommended.
and consider supporting their efforts because it's really an amazing
You just
cause.
know with Kevin and Susie Davis and their amazing foundation, you just know every shekel you put there
is a good
is
shekel
going to go to
spent.
the right place.
Yeah.
Now, people say, okay, when did you start writing fiction? When did you start moving away from history and politics and diplomacy to write fiction? They got it backwards. I started as a fiction writer. I started when I was 12, 13 years old. I came home from school one day. I had a strange feeling, not the feeling you expect from a 12, 13-year-old boy. It was a poem. I sat down and wrote a poem. Who cries for the soul of a pigeon? Like a depressive adolescent poem. And every day I came home from school and I wrote a poem. By the age of, again, by 13, I had a collection of poems. I brought them into New York to the publishing house, to Knopf. They rejected it. I went up to my room and cried for a few days. Little I know, it was like the first of many, many rejections. I would save them all. They would fit, today in a file about the thickness of a Manhattan phone book, and if you remember what that was. But I kept on writing, and I wrote short stories. I wrote film scripts. And when I was 17, I wrote a film called Comrades and Arms, a short film that I also produced and directed, a World War I film that won the PBS Young Filmmakers Contest, like the first prize. It was on TV. And I thought, okay, obviously I'm going to go to Hollywood. And when I was in my early 20s, I went to Hollywood and I got a job as Orson Welles' assistant. Now,
Wow,
I don't know if you
really?
remember Orson Welles.
Of course.
When I talk to people your age and I say I was Orson Welles' assistant,
both
they use
film
and
so
film,
they look at me and they say,
They force
"Wow,
us.
you're so old. You're so old." And no Orson Welles, was he was a horrible human being, but
Really?
he was massively obese and cursing all the time. You guys will not remember this, but he did a series of commercials for Paul Masson Wine Company, which everyone of my generation remembers. He says, Paul Masson said 100 years ago, no wine before its time. And I held the cue cards for that commercial.
Wow.
Wow.
So
That's crazy.
and I thought I would go on to write, but I also had this other path in life, which was my Zionist and Israel path. And I started coming here to Israel when I was 15 to work on kibbutz. And, I think the kibbutzim were very happy to see me go because I left a trail of wrecked tractors wherever I went. But I wasn't much of a farmer, but I loved it. And I think I've told the story on this podcast before, how I met Israel's ambassador to the United States when I was 15 years old. And I shook his hand and I swore, I'm going to be him someday. I'm going to be Israel's ambassador to the United States. The guy's name was Yitzhak Rabin. And later I became an advisor to Rabin. And then, eventually, so I had to leave Hollywood and come here at least to try to be a soldier. So I was a lone soldier, Chayal Boded, and the paratroopers. And from there, I never went back to Hollywood. But I never stopped writing. I never stopped writing for a second. So my first fiction book, it was called Sand Devil. You mentioned it. It is the best short fiction collection about the Negev ever written, because it's the only short collection of short fiction about the Negev ever written. After that, I published with Penguin a novel called Reunion. You mentioned it was based on my father's World War II stories. I used to go to his reunions. So it's also, a lot of these things that people point out that I like murder and mystery. So these were murder and mystery stories.
These are what, 20 years? This is 20 years ago.
20 years ago. Then I went into government. Now, in Israel, as in the United States and other countries, if you're in government, you can't publish books. If you know this. You can write books, but you can't publish books.
Really?
The president doesn't publish a book. When he's in the White House, he waits till he gets out.
No, but Bennett just released a book, right? How to win a...
Yeah, but was he in government when he published it?
not in government. It's
Yeah.
Knesset.
Yeah.
I was in government, so I couldn't publish, and I was ambassador. I couldn't publish it. This is our state controller determined this, so I had to wait. But that doesn't mean I stopped writing. So the Night Archer and other stories, a collection of 51 stories. Many of them are written when I was in government. And I can talk about length about the book, but as soon as I got out of government, I began to publish again. I wrote this book, the next one that's coming out, To All Call on Truth, during Corona. A lot of time to write. And I have another novel, which will probably come out in the fall or the winter, called Fourth Cliff.
Wow.
Which is
So you're
very
prolific.
Yeah, what are you going to do during Corona? I wrote a lot of articles. I write for Tablet and I write for the Atlantic Monthly. But that's what you do in Corona.
Yeah.
And
But what's easier for you? Because your bestsellers, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, are the nonfiction books. So I wonder, what's easier and more fun for you? more
As
fluent.
they say in colloquial English, it's 6 of one and half dozen of the other. They come from very different places. I can sit down and write history and then go right to write fiction right after that because they come from different parts of my brain. And true the other way around. I can write fiction and go to history. And it just depends. It depends on how tough the story is. I loved writing these short stories. To All Call and Truth was painful. It's a tough book. And I go back to the world of my childhood and my youth, which a world that doesn't exist anymore. It's about a Jewish a suburban community in the early 70s when it's the last moment where Jews were still an ethnicity in the United States. And the question of all the great American Jewish writers, Philip Roth, Saul Bellow, Bernard Malatesta, they all ask the same question: how can I be a Jew and an American at the same time? Saul Bellow's famous book, The Adventures of Augie March, right? Nobel Prize winner, begins with a sentence. It starts off with, "I am American, Chicago born." You think John Updike had to start his novels like that? With an assertion, hey, I'm American. All right? Today, you go forward 50 years, young American Jews not only do not ask that question, how I can be American Jewish at the same time, they don't even understand the question. Mm-hmm. Even a Haredi in Brooklyn doesn't ask that question. Of course I'm American. I'm American as anybody. But that was the world I grew up in, where there was a tension between Jewish identity.
Do you think the tension is disappearing because slowly the Judaism is disappearing? The Jewish identity?
No, because as I said before, in Brooklyn too, I think it has to do with that America has become much more diverse and has embraced its diversity. I grew up in white bread America. If you were going to be an astronaut, you were going to be Scott Carpenter and Buzz Aldrin. You were going to be a WASP. There were quota systems on the Ivy League schools. The nightly news people were all, Chet Huntley, David Brinkley. And it was a white bread country. I mean, when Kennedy was elected...
But the quotas were on Jews as well?
They were primarily on
Jews.
Primarily
in the
on
70s.
Jews. Yeah, they started to fall off by the 70s. But they, as you go into the 70s, they still had them. And it was harder to get in, certainly from an East Coast Jew to get into these colleges. And when the quotas came down, so many things changed for American Jews. One of the things that changed was the historic melding of young Jews with young WASPs. And you will be very hard-pressed today to find a truly WASP family without Jewish members. And where did they meet each other? Ivy League schools. That's where they met each other.
Daughter of the ex-president, right?
Everybody, the joke in the 2016 election was that of the three candidates, Bernie Sanders, Hillary, and Trump, only one of them had non-Jewish grandchildren. And that was Bernie Sanders. That basically says it all there, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah.
It says it all.
But it says it all also in the other side, meaning, as I mentioned before, that there's this assimilation, right? The Bernie Sanders, he's the Jewish one of them. And
didn't. I know, but it changed the nature of the American Jewish community. It really did. And
so you miss those times?
I don't miss them.
You long for them when you write the book?
There's a nostalgia factor. There's a point where they're sitting in a delicatessen. My two characters are sitting in a deli and they're having brunch on Sunday, and they're serving herring and they're serving pastrami, and there's a Manischewitz calendar on the wall from a year before that no one's bothered to take down, and Sandy Cooper says to his best friend, he says, this world's going to disappear, and his friend says to him, yeah, they all do, and all worlds are destined or doomed to disappear. One of the reasons I chose to go back to 1972 in this book is that that period evokes our present time. 1972 was an incredibly disruptive period. There were bombs going off in federal offices. There was the Weather Underground. There was terrible protests on campus, Kent State Massacre. And if you grew up during that period, you said, oh, America probably doesn't stand much of a chance. We're not going to be here in another 10 years. And so 1972 very much evokes 2019, 2021 in the great uncertainty and the great dislocation it engendered. So it'll be familiar to readers, even to young readers who didn't live through that period. They'll be familiar to them.
So, but there's also this element of tension between Jewish and American in the book?
Well, when I started writing the book, here's an interesting question to tell you, Eitan, that I grew up as the only Jewish kid in a neighborhood of Sicilians. And
Sounds like fun to me.
Yeah, it got the stuffing done. They were great when they got to be older, but when the kid, they beat the hell out of me.
Oh.
Okay, I was a
So
Christ
you weren't
killer.
invited for ZD or something?
No.
You were a
I was
Christ
made
killer.
into ZD. and you know, that had a big impact on my Zionist development. Obviously, you know, big impact. You get hit in the head; it's an impact. So, how did I get onto this subject? So you asked me about it. So I started writing this book, and there's a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism in this book. Sandy Cooper encounters anti-Semitism in the school. And when I first started writing, I thought, well, Americans are not going to believe this because most Americans didn't have the experience I had. I've met American Jews who never encountered anti-Semitism. They grew up in San Francisco. They grew up in New York City. They never encountered anti-Semitism. And yet, you know, starting in 2017, 18, the level, the escalation of anti-Semitism in America will make this look familiar to them as well. This is what was going on back in 1972. It's not new. And it was anti-Semitism, which was, you know, it depends where you were in the country, was deeply ingrained.
I mean, it'll kind of, I guess, resonate with the cultural discourse that's going on in the United States right now. I mean, racism is kind of on the
privileges.
Yeah, but I thought maybe this book may prove a little controversial. Okay, brace yourselves.
How
Why?
so?
Because I have 3 characters in this book who are African Americans.
How dare you, a
Exactly.
white man?
And
Right.
they are
Jews are white, by the way, if you didn't
By
know.
the way, I did not grow up right. If one had told me when I was like 12 years old, that I was white, I'd look like you're crazy. I played sports in college, and I'll never forget, you know, etched into the door of one of the stalls in my bathroom was the question, are Jews white? And someone had scrolled in.
I want it on T-shirts.
Someone needs to answer
Okay,
this.
no, so they answered it. And underneath it, someone had scrawled in, yes, but. Yes, but when I was going to
great
school, it
t-shirt.
was yes, but. Now, American Jews have gone from being yes, but to being the ultimate white people. They are the ultimate affluent, privileged white people. But that was not the way I grew up. And I personally grew up, you know, outside of Newark. My father worked in Newark with the African American community. He dedicated his life to it and building those bridges. So I grew up around these people, and I wanted them in the book. But I'm dealing with African Americans caught up in this period in different ways. Yes, they're encountering prejudice, and yes, they're interacting with Jews who are, on one hand, very liberal, but they'll tell anti-black jokes behind their back. But there's one character who's quite a central character in the book, who's a 13, 14-year-old African American girl who is the only African American student in this junior high school, and her dilemma is rather unique. What's her dilemma? What does every 13 and 14-year-old want to be?
Mekubal.
Superstar.
No, they want to be like everybody else.
Ah, okay.
You don't want to stand out. You want to be like everybody else. But because of the color of her skin, she's standing out, and she's standing out in a bizarre way because this is on the the crest of the civil rights movement, and everyone's being super, super nice to her and giving her high grades. And she goes to the guidance counselor and said, "Help me with this." And the guidance counselor says that I've encountered many adolescents who are suffering because they're not popular enough. I've never encountered an adolescent who's suffering because she's too popular. And this becomes one of the themes in the book around this character. And so I don't know whether,
It's scary
I'm going to get censored for this, but,
Yeah, and nowadays, making art, writing scripts, making movies, it's scary with today's culture, right? You don't know where you'll stumble. For example, slang, like black slang. Can you write it or no?
And certain words you can't use. And believe me, at the ultimate day, I tend to think that the text suffers from it because I'm dancing around things. These are the only things I dance around. In the short story collection, I had really wonderful reviews. I can't complain about the reviews, but there was one reviewer, which in an overall very good review, took me to task for one story about a Muslim leader from the 15th century, who was 15th century, was a cruel leader. He's torturing some people. And that was interpreted by this interviewer as anti-Muslim. And there's cruelty throughout the book, but only my depiction of this Muslim leader who's actually in a very difficult dilemma in his cruelty. And it's called slave to power. He's a slave who runs the empire. That's the way it worked in medieval Islamic empires. And so he's dealing with questions of freedom and assertion. I'd like to think that all my stories are about 3 things. They're about the story, whether it's a love story, a ghost story, or a war story, or a diplomacy story. It's about the experiences that they draw on. So if you have a story about social climbers in Washington, these are people I knew. If you have a story about soldiers, these are people I knew. It's about ghosts. It's about ghosts I knew. And then the third thing is I want it to be about something. I want it to be about human relationships. I want it to be about the nature of reality. I want to say something in each story. In the novel too, it draws on my experiences. Hopefully it's a good read. You can't put it down. And I want to say something about the nature of relationships, the natures of sometimes the often addictive nature of relationships.
What do you mean?
Well, my main character gets addicted in a relationship, and a very dangerous relationship. As I mentioned, there's a murder afoot in here. So I'm not giving away anything because it actually opens with the murder. So you're going to get the murder on the first page.
Okay.
Okay. The question is, who done it and why? But I wouldn't call this
the janitor, obviously.
Oh, you can't do that because the janitor's African American. So you're not going to do that. I get really. Okay. He's terrific. He's based on a real character too, a person I greatly admired growing up, and taught me a lot. Taught me how to play chess.
Really?
Yeah,
just like in
the Queen's Gambit.
Yeah.
The Queen's Gambit. The janitor taught me how to play chess. Yeah.
Wow.
Just like the Queen's Game. Yeah. I didn't quite go to the,
You didn't go on to become a child prodigy.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
Nah. Yeah, I'll be a child prodigy yet. But he did. He taught me how to play chess.
Wow. So, I mean, after all this writing and after like a year in Corona, do you not miss politics?
I miss politics.
You do?
You're sure? Yeah, sure.
Really?
Like I don't miss itch you got to scratch.
It's not sitting at 3:00 in the morning and voting on 5,000 bills where you were basically a finger. They tell you what to vote for. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, all night long. The big fear is you're going to fall asleep. That's the big fear. And everyone's always jabbing me. Wake up. And you don't miss that. What you miss is the interaction with the Israeli public and be able to serve your public. And people don't understand that in front of your office at Knesset, there's a long line of people who need help, who view you as their address in Knesset, whether it be Olim Chadashim, lone soldiers, Druze. I had all these different constituents that I worked with. And there's a tremendous amount of gratification in that. And also because the Knesset acts as a foreign policy body, I was engaged in diplomacy all the time. So I had the diplomacy of the Knesset, I had the diplomacy of the Prime Minister's office. I mean, I did extraordinary trips around the world, meet with foreign... I rarely did a week go by that I did not meet with the president, a prime minister, or a foreign minister. All the time. You can't get more interesting than that.
Their ear. You had their ear.
Well, I was representing the state of Israel. They weren't meeting me qua me. They're meeting me as the person who was going to speak for the government.
Mm-hmm. But I guess they used your knowledge and consulted with you.
I tried to be as candid as possible. Boy, I've never forgot reading with the minister of the French government, and just lacing into him about the labeling policy. They were going to label Jewish products, from Judea and Samaria. I said, as a Frenchman, aren't you ashamed of yourself? And do you know what happened in France in the 40s about labeling Jewish goods? How could you possibly do that today? And it's totally anti-Semitic. You're not labeling Turkish goods from Cyprus now, are you? Or Chinese good from Tibet, are you now? Or anything. You're doing it just for the Jewish state. You, sir, are an anti-Semite. And I don't care. That's not, people have to hear this, and they're shocked. Shocked. Europeans are very interested.
Did it change anything?
He converted. Now he's a rabbi.
France was a country that was going to apply the labeling and ultimately didn't. But I learned a lot particularly about Europeans. I learned that anti-Semitism is so deeply ingrained in the European worldview that they don't even know they're anti-Semitic. They think they're not anti-Semitic. I was sitting with, this is just, anecdotally, I'm leading an Israeli delegation to the Dutch Foreign Affairs Committee in their parliament. And they're sitting there with right-wingers, left-wingers, centrists, and they say, well, the bitterest debates we have in the Dutch parliament are about Israel. And everybody says, the right wing or left wing, yeah, those are our bitterest debates. I said, let me get this straight. You are facing a catastrophic refugee problem. Your economy's in shambles, okay? And what you're talking about is Israel? Let me get this straight. And suddenly, as they say in Hebrew, the Simon falls. You understand that the Europeans are having these bitter debates not about Israel, but about themselves. It's about themselves. And we are the lens through which Europe looks at itself. And it has been that way, I think, not just for hundreds of years, but potentially thousands of years. It's the way the Romans were the non-Jews.
So when they want to stop looking at themselves, they kill 6 million.
Well, I think it got things probably from the European perspective, things got out of hand with that one. But they don't want to, let's look like Zim, as they say, go overboard. But it's emblazoned on the front of many cathedrals in Europe is the picture of ecclesiastic overthrowing synagogue, which is usually a strong church pushing out a coward Jewish woman. And if you look at a church not far from here in Abu Ghosh, built during the Crusades in the 11th century, there's a wall painting, the same thing, of ecclesiastics pushing out synagogue. Why? There were no Jews back then. The Crusaders killed them all. And if you look at the Roman coin that was minted after the destruction of the Second Temple, it was Judea Capta. And what you see on that coin is a coward Jewish woman being pushed by a Roman under a tree. So I mean, this image is deeply ingrained in the European mentality. And there are parts of our interaction with Europe are very positive. They give us a lot of funds for scientific development through the EU. And,
also to debatable NGOs that strive to undermine the Jewish state.
They try to undermine the Jewish state. They try to create facts on the ground. And
one hand helps, and the other hand destroys.
But what they have in common is they all derive from the same obsession. They're just really obsessed with this
They wouldn't leave us alone. Let us be.
For good and for bad. For good and bad, they won't leave us alone. And it's extraordinary how deeply ingrained it is. I'll just tell you a funny story. I'm going to write about this. I was home. My father passed away in December. And,
how old was he?
He was almost 96.
Oh, wow.
They lived a long and wonderful life. And we were, one of the last meals we had with him was the Thanksgiving meal. And they had the round-the-clock care. And in the United States, many of the caregivers are from Georgia. Mm-hmm. So, Georgians are, first of all, wonderful people, but they also have you're Georgian?
I did high school in Georgia.
Because they have almost no history of anti-Semitism. I mean, except for this guy Stalin. They really don't.
I
don't mean Georgia in the United States. I mean Georgians, real Georgia.
Okay.
Golgia. What they call here is rather, dismissively Gruzia. And we're sitting around the table and we're discussing, of course, one does in November, we're discussing Donald Trump and his policies toward Israel, and discussing about the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and why it was done. And the caregiver comes to the table carrying the turkey. And this is a person really like a member of the family. A member of the family knows all the brachot, everything. Says, well, it was obviously why he did it. The Jews control America. They control all the power in America. We just looked at her
casually
and said, whoa, where'd that come from? And then you realize just, as the Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir used to say, they drink it with their mother's milk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's play a little thought game. Let's say that I'm Bennett or Lapid, right? Yeah. And I managed to overthrow Prime Minister Netanyahu, and now I'm the Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. And now I come to former Ambassador Michael Oren, and I ask him, what should I do with the whole Biden-Iran situation? Mm-hmm. What would you say to me?
I would quote Ronald Reagan, stay the course. Why stay the course? Because our policy right now is the right policy. And I profoundly, emphatically believe this.
Define this policy.
Policy is opposing renewal of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. The deal is a terrible deal. It's a fraud. It's actually not a deal. It does not block Iran's path to the bomb. It paves Iran's path to the bomb. If you give me 2 hours, I'll explain it to you. I will direct your listeners to the article I published in the Atlantic Monthly about 2 months ago, which is the Israeli position, why this is a disaster. And, gentlemen, it will lead to war. If they renew this thing, we will have a regional war, and I see no way around it because the agreement will enable Iran eventually to break out and create a bomb. By the time it does...
And regain the funds.
No, in the meantime, they will gain hundreds of billions of dollars and legitimacy, and they will surround us with even more missiles. It's hard to imagine more missiles, but they will. But, and when we try to stop them from breaking out to get the bomb, we're going to be hit. We're going to be hit by thousands and thousands of rockets.
But it will happen, right? I mean, Joe Biden is running to them with open arms.
It will happen. They'll renew it. Yeah, I think they'll renew it. I think right now, Iran is escalating all the time, and America's de-escalating all the time. So if you're an Iranian, what's to prevent you from escalating even further? And the Iranian, the position of the administration, and these are people I know very well. First of all, I worked with Biden at a time when Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, basically boycotted the embassy. So my point of contact,
When he was still coherent.
who?
Biden.
No, he was very coherent. I don't know, but he was wonderful. I loved him. I love the guy. He's so interesting. He's one of the rare politicians I've met who actually likes people, and likes talking to people, and funny. And every other sentence was, as my father used to say. He had great ones. My favorite one was, as my father used to say, never crucify yourself on a small cross. Go translate that into Hebrew. Great line. Anyway, so he was wonderful. Tony Blinken was great. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. These are all fine people who are committed to Israel, committed to our security, but they're also Democrats. And the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is not the small branch it was during the Obama years. Now it's very big, and they are not afraid of Biden. They were a little bit afraid of Obama. And the progressives have made the renewal of the JCPOA something like their holy grail. They don't even care what's in it. It's just, this is the litmus of whether you're a Democrat or not.
Which is the number one rule of negotiation, right? Don't want it more than the other side.
You ever negotiate in the old city and in the shuk, and you have to be able to walk away.
Yeah.
You have to be able to walk away.
Yeah.
And you can't keep on pushing more money across the table at the merchant. He's going to take you. He's going to make his price go up, not down.
But what does it mean, though, when you say push forward with the current program, like with the current plan? Because the current plan, it seems like it won't work. It won't prevent the deal. We are going to, like Eitan said...
Oh, our plan.
Our plan.
It won't plant the deal. It won't plant the deal. But we are establishing our legitimacy if we have to act once the deal is renewed. And I think that's important. I think when I have many disagreements with the Prime Minister, but when he says we are not bound by this deal in any way, that's an extremely important statement. We are not bound by this deal.
But what can we do?
Well, I'm not going to go into everything we can do. Obviously, we can do a lot, and I think we have done some things. I think it's the beginning, not even the end of the beginning. And
but if it's an inevitable outcome that the deal will be renewed, so it's an inevitable outcome that there will be a regional war.
Nothing is inevitable, but it is highly likely. It's highly likely.
So there will be a war. What would that war?
I have gamed this out in my mind many times. So what does it look like? It means that Iran, the JCPOA contains sunset clauses that begin to lift sanctions starting in 2 years, 2023. In 7 years, everything Iran that is doing illegally now, it can do 100 times over legally under the JCPOA. So think about that. They're talking about the ability to enrich enough uranium, not for one bomb, but for 100 bombs, if not more. Okay, that's just the enrichment. The JCPOA is 154 pages long. Exactly one half of one page deals with weaponization, making a warhead. And yet we know from the archive that the Mossad got out of Tehran that they're making a weapon.
Yeah.
Okay?
And the whole missile program.
And the missile program, this is the most extraordinary thing. Not only does it not delay their missile program, it accelerates it by lifting the UN embargo on it. So you've got the enriched uranium, you got the warhead to put it in, and you got the missile to deliver it, and you're going to have that within a decade. Meanwhile, as I said before, they're going to get hundreds of billions of dollars. They're not going to build schools and hospitals with this in the arm, right? They're going to invest it in Hezbollah. They're going to invest it in Hamas. And they're going to surround us with hundreds of thousands of rockets. Right now, they surround us with about 160,000.
So why does Biden and Biden's people, why do they push for that deal? Why?
Well,
it's so counterintuitive.
Well, as they say, all politics are domestic. There are domestic politics at play here. That's one. But the bigger reason is this. The America that, I grew up in, I talk about the white bread America going away, but it's also the America of the superpower, the America that was able to project power, willing and able to project large-scale military power around the world. As late as, 2003, 2006, when, George Bush sent 600,000 soldiers into Iraq and Afghanistan. Then America's gone. I can't think of any situation where America will project power like that today, almost, in any, given any provocation. And the only real way to stop Iran from getting the bomb and to negotiate an effective agreement is to have a realistic military option on the table. But the Iranians know, and frankly we know, that's not going to happen. And so if America has no teeth here, the only teeth it has are economic teeth. And officially, the Biden administration's position is we're going to renew the JCPOA, and then we're going to
Trump
work.
got them to their knees economically.
Yeah, and if Trump had been elected, they may have collapsed, may have given. I think he would have negotiated with Iran also. I was certain of him negotiating with Iran, but maybe at much better position to demand changes. But once they go back to the JCPOA, and there'll be no changes, the Biden administration has said they want to seek a longer and stronger deal. Well, the question we ask ourselves here: with what leverage? You've given it all up to get back to the JCPOA. You've lifted all the sanctions. With what leverage? The Iranian foreign minister had an interesting comment the other day. Just really got my attention. He said, we're happy to negotiate a longer deal. We look forward to the time we can sit with the Americans and discuss their arms sales to the Middle East. You get that? Americans think they're going to go talk about the ballistic program. No, the Iranians are going to talk about American arms sales to the Gulf and to Israel. And all of a sudden, that's going to become a bargaining chip. You want us to cut out our ballistic missiles? Hey, maybe cut back on some of that military aid.
Well, there was already a story that came out in the National Review, I think, about Kerry selling intel, Israeli intel to the or information about Israeli.
He wasn't selling;
operatives.
he was probably imparting. But
actually, he was just giving it away.
Well, whatever. He wasn't selling it, but he was sharing it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And that was I don't know whether that's true or not. I work with Senator Kennedy. There's an interesting Freudian slip. Senator Kerry.
Both had great hair.
Both in this, and they have great jaws. Both in the Senate and then in the State Department. And what can I say? Here's a person who gave at the end of his term one of the longest diplomatic speeches in modern memory, condemning Israel and blaming Israel for the failure of a peace process. Which I participated in, and which it failed because the Palestinians walked away, not because of settlements, but this just obsession with settlements. And he gave this speech at a time when 500,000 Syrians were being massacred, and America did nothing. So I would say that I've said it before. I think that John Kerry has an unhealthy obsession. We've used that word a lot today with the state of Israel.
But you're comfortable calling the Europeans
obsessive.
Anti-Semitic. Do you not think, on Kerry's part, that's anti-Semitism?
I think it's much more complex than that. He comes from a family that was partly Jewish. His brother is quite Jewish. Great guy, Cam, and very active in the community. It's complicated with him. It's like Madeleine Albright. These are the people who came from Europe escaping the Nazis and all of a sudden became WASPs.
And the democratic, progressive in general.
Well, he started that way, as a protester during the Vietnam period. But
I'm saying, are they borderline? Some of them borderline anti-Semitic? Those people?
I want to say what Larry Summers said when he was president of Harvard back in the early part of the century. He said, some people are guilty of anti-Semitism, not in intent but effect. All right, singling out Israel in that way, for an hour-and-a-half speech at a time when America's doing nothing to rescue 500,000 Syrians from getting killed. Well, you're going to condemn, a couple hundred Jews living on a hilltop. Okay, maybe it's not maybe it doesn't accord with American policy. I get it, but really, I remember when even when Biden was here and we embarrassed him by announcing a neighborhood that was going to be built in 7 years in Ramat Shlomo, he condemned our decision. Now, in the diplomatic world, there's a there's a menu of words you can deplore, you can regret. Okay, condemn is used for terrorism. So under that administration, our settlement policy was elevated or whatever, lowered to the level of terrorism. That's extraordinary. This is Jews living in their homeland. I don't care what you think about settlements, but this is Jews living in the land of Israel. Think about this. But I'm not done yet. One last point about John Kerry, and I can't help this. Okay, I can't help this. At the signing of the JCPOA, in 2015, he is on the stage with Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif, the foreign minister that represents the most repressive regime on the planet, a regime that seeks to destroy the state, to basically commit genocide, a regime which denies the Holocaust, in which John Kerry lost family members. And he's up there smiling, thinking this is the greatest thing in the world. Is that not something wrong with that picture? Am I the only one saying that?
And a few years later, allegedly, he goes and leaks. If it's true.
I don't know if it's true, but I'm contextualizing here.
But if it's true, what would you make of it?
Nothing. Not surprising. He denied it. Okay, he denied. Okay, denied it. But I also know that when we were alleged to have been acting in Syria, okay, get that little location, which was pretty much every night. We never claimed credit. That was our policy, opaqueness. And we did this because we didn't want to force the Syrians into reacting against us. And we didn't want to get into a war. Every morning when we woke up, it was leaked to the papers. And we didn't leak it.
Which reminds me the recent story with
Welcome to my world.
With the ship, right, in Sudan or Eritrea a couple of months ago. That there was this, someone did this clandestine operation, right?
Someone.
Yeah,
Somehow.
and it was leaked to the New York Times.
Right.
And at the beginning, there were rumors high official Israelis did it. But later, other rumors claimed, no, it was the American administration who leaked. And
they leaked it.
They leaked it before the operation.
Ooh.
And that risked the lives of some countries' soldiers.
Yeah, I know it is very problematic in that way. So what can I say? I don't know whether he did or not, but I'll contextualize it, and I wouldn't be surprised. There we go. How about that? Huh?
So, but I still don't understand what that war is going to look like. I mean, you said how Iran might prepare for that war. And what the situation, but would it be full out war in the Middle East?
I'll direct
I'm going to
you.
be in Italy.
I'll direct you to another article I wrote for the Atlantic Monthly called "The Next Middle Eastern War," where I actually set out how this happens, why it happens, and what it looks like. Part of what it looks like is what the IDF is training to do every day, and that is to go into the 200 southern Lebanese villages, under which Hezbollah has buried about 100,000 rockets. And they do this on purpose because they know that for us to get the rockets, we're going to have to destroy the village, which is what they want. They want us to be condemned by the international community for war crimes. They did it in 2006 too, and they'll do it again. Hamas does the same thing, and that'll be part of it. The big question is whether Israel.
This time we should keep the land. I say.
You say? I don't know. Spent a lot of time in Lebanon. Very pretty country. I was glad to get out of there though. And the question is whether we are going to take this battle to what the Saudis call the head of the snake. All right. So when they're shelling Tel Aviv, what do? Do we only respond in Beirut, or do we respond in Tehran? And that's a big question because we have capabilities. I won't go into them, but we have capabilities, and it's going to be an issue. But the estimate, by the way. In 2006, in the Second Lebanon War, Israel was hit with between 200 and 400 rockets a day. The IDF estimate for the next war...
before Iron Dome.
Yes. Remember, the whole north cleared out. I was in that war for 54 days. Oh, my God.
Fought in...
I was in Lebanon. I was in southern Lebanon. You read about my other book, Ally. It's a non-fiction book.
Non-fiction.
Non-fiction book. It reads a little like fiction. It's about my time. It's a memoir. But the IDF estimate for the next war is Israel will be hit with between 2,000 and 4,000 rockets. Imagine this.
A day.
And that will overwhelm Iron Dome. You think Iron Dome can keep up with that? Well, it can't. And even if Iron Dome, even if it's 90% effective, it means 1 out of 10 rockets going to get through, and they're going to have rockets that now have what's called cruise capabilities, individual targeting. They're not just standoff rockets. So it's going to be a completely different level, and the time is going to be our timetable will be very
fast.
Yeah, very fast, and that's what the IDF keeps on training on. If you noticed all these big maneuvers up north, it's just you got to go through these villages. You're going to have to clear them out. But that's just that threat. We're going to be hit by rockets from Shiite militias in Iraq. We'll be hit by rockets from Houthi rebels in Yemen. We'll be hit by rockets from Hamas and Islamic Jihad.
Also, you have drones.
And drones. A lot of things. We'll have multiple threats. So I don't want to sound
clean the shelters.
I don't want to sound apocalyptic, but
Aviv.
this is a kind of apocalypse. Listen, we're going to survive it. We're going to win the war. I have no doubt about that. But the stage is set by this Iran nuclear deal. It provides the cover, the legitimacy, and the money for Iran.
So one last question on the topic. Is there a chance that if Biden's voted out in 2024?
Well, I think the Republicans will make it on their platform. They withdraw from the JCPOA.
But I mean, will it? I mean, is it inevitable to happen before then, or is there time?
I think it'll happen before. It could happen tonight, before we know. And I think the Iranians are very smart. And they now, they if you notice, they began to escalate, to increase the number and speed of the centrifuges only after November, when they realized they had a new administration. They didn't dare do it with Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't do it with Trump. And so they're no dummies.
Yeah.
I always say, they invented, the Iranians claim they invented chess. So do the Indians, but the Iranians claim they invented chess, and they play on 3 boards at one time. It's the enrichment, the warhead, and the missile.
It's like a Garry Kasparov game with many, one of those roundabout games.
The kind of chess I never learned. My janitor never taught me to play. Or at least he taught me. I just never could accomplish that. But they're very smart. And you tip your hat to these guys.
So how come, I mean, it begs the question, listening to you and with your background in history and in politics, why when you go to write, you write about, a high school guidance counselor and not these bombastic political dramas that are.
It's what speaks to me, speaks to my soul. One of my great failures in life is that I've never learned to write. I could never write fiction in Hebrew. So I speak in Hebrew, I interview, I write op-eds in Hebrew. But the language of my soul is English. Several of the stories in The Night Archer take place in Israel. They're very Israeli stories. And many of them are Jewish stories. They're Holocaust stories. I would urge your readers to read a story called Afikomen, about a 13-year-old American Jewish kid bored to death at his Seder and goes off during the Afikomen sun and finds out something earth-shattering about his father. Read Afikomen. You'll get a kick out of it.
Okay.
Trust me on this one, okay? Trust me on this one. So I'm drawing on my many experiences, and I've been blessed by having these many experiences. I'm blessed by having survived some of these many experiences. I mentioned that I was in 2006 in the Second Lebanon War, but I've been in several wars. I was in the siege of Beirut in 1982, and I took all of my war experiences and put them into about a page and a half. One of the short stories takes place during a war. And there are people who have been in wars. That's all they write about is the war. And I don't want to. I want to write about being a father and a husband and a grandfather, and I want to write about about relationships. I want to write about God. There's a lot of stories that deal with faith. I am a person of faith, so it's important for me to write about faith. I'm thinking about faith all the time. One of my favorite stories is called Day 8, and it asks the question, or tries to answer the question, why did God give human beings souls? Why? What's that about? And but it's kind of a comedy. It's kind of a funny thing. It's about God's conversations with Satan about the soul. So I'm thinking, so why? I think if I can be very frank with you, I think people sometimes are uncomfortable with this because they want to pigeonhole somebody. Say, okay, you're this, but you're not that. And it becomes unsettling. But what can I say?
Especially since there's a stigma of politicians that they have to be very cynical, and I think that's kind of like almost like paradoxical to the stigma of a novelist or of
But I wasn't a cynical politician either. I went into politics honestly. Listen, I love the rush and I love the influence. And I love the attention. Don't get me wrong, but what really guided me was my love of this country, the love of these people. I love my people. I just do. They drive me crazy sometimes, but I love them. And I love this country until it hurts. I'd cave. And to me, people would say to me, why would you want to be ambassador and then go into Knesset? What a downer that is. And I'd say, are you crazy? I get to be a democratically elected representative in the first Jewish parliament in 2,000 years. You understand what a privilege that is? It's like, for me, it was mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. And I'm being very genuine about this. I mean, really, I told you there were things about being in the Knesset that made me nuts, the voting all night. But that was just a great privilege.
Fine, Eitan and I will run.
Run!
Okay.
I say this to people who are actually running for Knesset. They come to me sometimes and say, why am I doing this? There is a member of Knesset who was not in this Knesset, but was debating whether he or she had done the right thing. And I said, next time you're walking down the hall at 2 o'clock in the morning, pinch yourself. Just stop and pinch yourself and understand where you are in a historical sense. Understand where you are. Yeah. I have a little fantasy conversation with my great-great-grandfather. So I see on the wall here your pictures of your great-grandparents.
Yeah.
It's on the old country.
Parents of my grandmother. Yeah.
Yeah.
Polish.
Yeah. So I have a conversation with my great-grandfather that looks something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I say to him the following, you know, we're maybe going into our 5th election for this guy Netanyahu. And I'm just going crazy. I'm just so disturbed by it. And my great-grandfather looks at me and says, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You live in an independent Jewish state in the land of Israel? You have the world's leading innovative economy. You have an army that's more than twice as large as the British and French armies combined. You speak Hebrew. You have great food and beaches. And you're complaining about a 5th election? Let me get this straight. And this conversation actually helps me sometimes when I want to like tear my hair out about the 5th election. But I urge you and your listeners to have the conversation next time you're thinking that, you know, that all this isn't worth it. Have that conversation. See what he says.
I think that's a good note to end
Gratitude.
on.
Yeah.
Gratitude.
Yeah. Dr. Michael Oren, thank
Pleasure,
you
guys.
so much for coming again.
Yeah.
And
Guys,
you're always invited.
The book is actually coming out in a week.
Next week.
May 11th, right?
To all who call in truth is from Psalm 45. The Lord is near to all who call upon him, to all who call upon him in truth. You say it 3 times a day in the Ashrei prayer. It's right there. And The Night Archer and other stories.
And they're available for
Amazon,
Kindle,
everything.
bookstores,
Digital, in
What about
cuneiform
Audible?
and hieroglyphs. It's all available.
Did you read them for Audible?
For Audible, it's Audible books. And
You read them?
I did not read these. I did not read them. They actually encourage you not to read your own books. I don't know why. Some guy with it. I got to choose of a number of people they gave me. Who do you like?
Okay.
I chose a guy with an Alabama accent. And I didn't. I don't know. It's just a guy. But
Wait, but you did read one of your books. No?
I read Ally. That is non-fiction.
No.
But
Nice.
I didn't. It was very hard. Oh boy, that was days and days in the studio. Wow. But it's interesting how hard it is to read a book. But I didn't. So it's available on audio.
Awesome.
Awesome, guys. To all who
right.
call in truth, The Night Archer. Check out also some of Dr. Michael Oren's old books, Sand Devil, Reunion.
And follow him on Twitter and Facebook.
Twitter, Facebook. Yeah. My Facebook is down for a bit. I'm having a whole issue with Facebook. This is like
Good company.
Keep on getting hacked. So right now it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. I've had my Twitter hacked this year. Oh, good. So the price of writing fiction.
Of fame. Thank you so much,
right.
Dr.
Thank you, guys.
Oren. Before we go,
Yes.
we are sponsored by The Forward.
Visit forward.com/partner offer and enter promo code 2NJB to get an exclusive offer for podcast listeners.
Also, ערוץ 7, israelnationalnews.com. Check them out for great content in English.
Yes.
And last but not least, ajn.timesofisrael.com, Australian Jewish News. Do check them out.
Yes.
Highly
And of
recommended.
course, guys, we do this on our free time. So if you want to help us out, 2njb.com/donate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Michael.
guys. Thank you both.
Goodbye.
Once again.
Bye, guys.